Well, we're at it again, but today is one of my absolute favorite lessons or pieces that I want us to begin looking at, and that is discovering a little bit more about our own political ideology. So let's take a look real quick and define some of these terms and define some things I'm asking you to consider about political ideology, yours included. When we look at political ideology, we're really looking at what Americans value, and then that changes and that ebbs and that flows and that shifts. But a definition that we can work from is political ideology is the coherent set of beliefs about politics, public policy, and public purpose. It's what defines liberals and conservatives and moderates. It's what defines the core values and the public policy that we want to see made in our society. When we look at ideology, we typically can look at the demographics and who fits into the Republican Party coalition. Typically, we find that rural voters and farmers are a core part of the Republican Party coalition. White males, business owners, conservative Christians, college-educated, those different groups fit typically into the Republican Party coalition. The Democratic coalition looks a little bit like this. They're urban dwellers, they're union members, Hispanics and African Americans and people of most ethnicities are fitting into the Democratic coalition. Those with a high school diploma and with an advanced degree typically vote within the Democratic coalition. If we take a look, we could also look at gender. And there's a huge gender gap when we look at Republicans versus Democrats. In the 2012 election, you can see from this data here that when we separate out data by gender and race and ethnicity, if we take a look at the total, in total, particularly women tend to vote a little bit more on the Democratic side, and men tend to vote a little bit more on the Republican side. Now, if we look at white women and white men taken together, they're consistently Republican. If we take a look at black men and black women, they are overwhelmingly voting for the Democrat, Barack Obama, in 2012. If we take a look at Latino men and Latina women, again, a strong Democratic coalition. Now, this is a really important piece because if we're to separate these groups, and if we were to say, let's look at some of the largest and fastest growing population within our country, and we look at people of color. If we look at people of color, particularly black and Latino or Latina, and then we factor in all other races, this could be a concern, and it is currently a concern for the Republican Party. Now, if we take a look at just women, and if we take a look at women over here, I should have colored it red, but if we take a look at women over here, this is where Republicans typically see an opening for some more people to come into their coalition. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to work, but that is a place where Republicans find an opportunity to gain more, especially because if we look over here, the significant numbers in the Democratic coalition when we look at people of color. This could be an identity crisis for the Republicans. In many ways, it is currently an identity crisis for the Republican Party. How are they going to get more people into their tent and into their coalition? I want us to take a look at some other ideologies and some of the key issues that we look at within the Democratic or Republican Party. This is a screenshot from a simulation called Win the White House from iCivics.org, but I think it does a really good job of looking at the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and what they believe. Now, if we take a look at the Democratic Party first, we look at issues of government transparency, retirement security, equal access to health care, supporting gay rights, right to organize, nuclear disarmament, global cooperation, alternative energy, women's right to choose, voting rights, the protection of natural resources, gun control, federal funding of education, and pollution standards. Now, by no means are these the only issues, but there are things to consider. For example, government transparency. Democrats typically believe that government should be open and responsive to the needs of its citizens. When we look at pollution standards, that the Democrats believe that they should set limits on the amount of pollution companies can create, that education is key to the future of our success as a country, that all Americans have the right to a healthy and secure retirement, and that we need to ensure that Medicare and Social Security are preserved. We look at equal access to health care and the debate about Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act, and that's key. Gun control advocates in the Democratic Party are saying we need to limit the sale of ownership to criminals and the mentally ill. Protection of natural resources is very important. Supporting gay rights is important. The right to organize and unionize for worker safety, wages, and job security. Voting rights, allowing the voting booth to be open to everybody. A woman's right to choose an abortion shouldn't be limited by the government, Democrats say. Nuclear disarmament is big in terms of global peace and security for Democrats, and we want to, they say, decrease the number of weapons across the globe. When we look at global cooperation, Democrats typically say we want to, in the 21st century, challenge organizations in global cooperation like the United Nations to make the world a safer place. In an alternative energy, they would say we like and need renewable energies as an alternative to fossil fuel. Now again, that does not mean that Republicans can't believe this. No, in fact, Republicans have positions that honor on other issues. The GOP tends to believe things like we need less spending and limit the role of government in our lives. Marriage is traditional and between a man and a woman, and families should have that mother and father for stability. Education, Republicans say, funding should go to families so they can choose school, be it private or public. Energy independence, we would say things like America should use its own natural resources to become energy independent from other oil-producing nations, including our own oil. Fiscal responsibility is key, saying government shouldn't use taxpayer money to bail out failing companies. People in the Republican Party believe we have a right to work. Shouldn't have to be required to join a union in order to get the benefits of being able to work in that particular company or that particular shop. Protecting the unborn lives and the issue of abortion is, of course, very important for Republicans when they say we believe that babies are innocent human beings from the moment of conception and have a fundamental right to life that must be protected by the government. And they say things like gun control and law-abiding citizens shouldn't be restricted from ownership. They talk about lower taxes. They talk about needing to secure our borders. Peace through strength and the strengthening of our military creates a strong government and a strong position in the world. Fighting the terrorist threats with the full force and fury of the military. Global independence versus interdependence says the U.S. should maintain its values in international relations, and ultimately the driver of all economic growth, we say in the Republican Party, is that businesses, through small businesses and lower taxes and regulation, is key. Now, that list isn't to say it's the only set of things, but it is a pretty extensive place for us to begin. As a way to summarize this, liberals or Democrats typically believe in more domestic spending. They believe in pro-choice issues. They believe that affirmative action is important, and they favor progressive taxation. Whereas conservatives, and they also favor gay marriage and the rights and protections that go along with that. Whereas Republicans or conservatives tend to believe in more military spending versus domestic spending, tend to be pro-life, tend to oppose affirmative action, and want to keep taxes low on everybody, not just taxing the rich. In fact, tax the rich less so that more business innovation can come from that new money. And conservatives typically support traditional marriage. These are simple views and simple broad brushstrokes that don't get to the nuances of what it means to be a liberal or conservative. That takes an enlightened mind. That takes an enlightened understanding of politics and the issues that we face in order to find out for ourselves how we define ourselves within that spectrum of liberal or conservative. Or maybe there's a whole other plane that we need to examine. So now it's your turn to examine that, to figure out where you typically fall on the liberal to conservative spectrum, or maybe you go in another direction into the second dimension of political ideology that we're going to look at. So your job is to examine these political typology quizzes that are on my website and complete the surveys, but consider these questions as you do it. Number one, are these tools a net positive or a net negative for our politics? Do they do us a good service in helping us engage in the political process? Do they promote engagement, or do they serve to oversimplify that civic process? Or do they create enlightened individuals and an enlightened understanding that's needed to work towards the common good within our political process? Now, you're going to find that some of them are short and some of them are easy. Some of them require you to give only one of two answers, and that bimodal response might be a little bit more difficult or uncomfortable for you. You'll also find that the last two ask you to kind of move a slider. How important is the issue to you? And that's a great tool to use. You may have an easy answer to the question, but you don't really care about it. Well, you can minimize that issue, or you can maximize an issue if that is a fundamental concern for you. So let's dive right into those things on my website so that we can be ready to talk about where you fall and what it is that you would identify currently as your political ideology, and maybe how these things challenged or informed your new understanding of your political ideology. Let's find out what you are. Let's get to work.